How could someone who saved over $1 million actually go broke in retirement? Not, we don't have money to travel this year, broke, but broke. How does that actually happen? It's not because that they were reckless, and it's not necessarily because there was a market crash. Sometimes people fall for what I like to call the liquidity myth. Many times, investors in retirement will confuse liquid with always available, and that may not be the case. I'm Michael Baker, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. For nearly 2 decades, I've been helping couples prepare and plan for their retirement years. And one of the things that I continuously see is this trap that people may fall into as they're approaching their retirement years. I like to call it the liquidity myth. In some cases, people think that they can treat their portfolio like it's just a checking account. Need a new car? Tap the portfolio. Kids need help with a down payment for a house? Tap the portfolio. Mom and dad need help with some bills or expenses? Tap the portfolio. Unexpected medical diagnosis and a rash of medical bills? You guessed it, tap the portfolio. But this is one of the most critical errors that I think a lot of people make as they approach retirement. They're not looking at their portfolio or their total portfolio of retirement assets through the proper lens. So let's start out and define what is the liquidity myth. This stems out of a conversation I had with someone years ago who is renowned in the retirement income space. And we were chatting specifically about portfolio of assets and how many investors, many people in retirement want to apply the 4% rule to their retirement income strategies. And for a brief primer on the 4% rule, it's not a rule, but it was a finding through some research, and many people like to use it as a rule of thumb. So the 4% rule basically states that if whatever your balance or your portfolio of assets is, let's say it's $1 million, you could reasonably expect with the right allocation to take a 4% withdrawal and every year adjust that withdrawal for inflation, and that portfolio should last about 30 years. I won't get into whether or not I like the 4% rule. It's not a methodology that I like to follow specifically. I think there are other ways out there to create retirement income, but it is a decent rule of thumb. It's relatively easy for people to understand, and it gives people some insights on what type of income they may expect their portfolio to produce in retirement. But here is where this liquidity trap falls into place. If you are applying the 4% rule or some type of systematic methodology like that to a withdrawal strategy, well, those assets that you're using, they're not necessarily liquid and available if you want to use them for other things. You have to account for those other things being funded through the withdrawals. What I mean is that if your portfolio is set up to give you a $50,000 distribution each year adjusted for inflation, that would be a pretty large portfolio balance to start with. So on paper, it's going to look like you're relatively flush with money. However, if that portfolio is supposed to last you for the next 30 to 35 years, which would likely be best practice retirement income planning, so you have to start looking at the longevity of that portfolio and that portfolio's ability to protect your lifestyle for the next 30 to 35 years. So for instance, if the rule that you're using puts your initial withdrawal rate at around $50,000 per year, but yet you want to use another extra withdrawal for, let's say, a $25,000 home project. And then the next year you want to have another $20,000 to $25,000 down payment for a new car, or you want to take a large trip for another $20,000 to $25,000. If that's the case, what you're doing isn't necessarily sticking to a withdrawal rate strategy, and you're adding all this ad hoc spending, which is making your withdrawal rate much higher. Now, it can be very tempting to do this during markets. This is called the wealth effect. When we've had several years of a bull market and those portfolio balances have inflated and they're looking really nice and flush, we tend to think, hey, we're doing great. We've got this extra money. Look at the number on this piece of paper. You can't take it with you. We might as well spend it. And to some degree, I think, you know what, we should enjoy the good years and we should reap some of those profits and use them to enjoy life. However, you've got to be very careful because overspending is one of those errors that can really put you on a downward trajectory, because spending money when markets are good tends to be psychologically easier than spending money in down markets. But if we're spending all of our capital or we're overspending because markets have been good, what are we going to do when markets go south? Are we also removing some of that margin and cushion that we would have if markets turn against us? The next thing I want you to consider when it comes to this liquidity myth is the impact of inflation on your lifestyle and your portfolio. In many cases, when you start to structure a retirement income strategy, a lot of different planners will do it differently. It's almost universally accepted that the initial withdrawals or the initial paychecks that you're going to receive are going to come from relatively stable and conservative sources. So that means that a lot of the assets that are dedicated for the future are probably going to be your growth assets. So again, this is one of those things that can be tricky from a psychological standpoint, because if the market has done really well and those growth assets have inflated, well, the tendency could be like, hey, we've got plenty of money here, let's go ahead and use it. However, inflation is a stealth tax. We have to remember our purchasing power is slowly eroding over time. And if you look here at this chart, you can see how inflation over a prolonged period of time, in fact, this chart shows back to 1983 to 2023, you can see the erosion of just $10, where it gets more than cut in half. So think about this, your retirement, your likelihood of retirement is, for most people, is going to be 2 people for 3 decades. That's a married couple, 2 people for 3 decades. What could be the impact of just low grade, historically normal inflation over that period of time? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, Michael, hey, listen, I get it. Inflation's a big deal, but come on. We're not going to be spending as much money in our 80s with our 60s and 70s. We fully expect to slow down in our 80s and not necessarily be spending at the same rate. And I would agree with you. You're not necessarily going to be spending the same amount of money, but there are other things. You have to be mindful of things like healthcare inflation going up, long-term care. What if tax rates were to also increase over the next 20 to 30 years? And then the last thing you should think about are spending shocks. These are the things that are likely to happen, but you can't necessarily plan on the timing. This things like an HVAC unit going out and you needing to replace, an HVAC unit. This could be, a storm that, creates damage and you need to get a new roof. And for whatever reason, the insurance company isn't going to cover it per se. Or, the car that you've been, driving until the wheels fall off. Well, the wheels finally fall off and you have to get a new vehicle. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the cost of vehicles, but the cost of vehicles is absolutely eye-popping. So this idea that we're going to just go get a used beater and that's going to be okay, those used beaters might be real money in the future. So we've got to think about these things, as these spending shocks are always going to be, part of doing life. You can't necessarily pinpoint them on a timeline and say, hey, this is the year that we're going to have this issue. But you also want to make sure your plan is flexible enough to take care of it. So if you're planning for retirement, this is one of those areas that is a little tricky, but I want you to think about this as a mindset shift, because think about it. During your working years, your income has largely been provided by your employment, your paycheck, and that's how you've organized life. That's how you do month-to-month spending. You plan for vacation, you save for Christmas, all these things is typically funded through your paycheck. And you're just systematically putting money in to your retirement accounts and your savings accounts and letting them build for retirement. However, once you retire, your balance sheet, your portfolio of assets, that is now a paycheck engine, and you have to make sure that engine is going to run. It has to have the right fuel. It has to have the right maintenance. You have to have the right type of plan in place to make sure that those assets are going to last. This means you need to have a spending plan that's put into place. This doesn't mean you're etching things into stone, but what it does mean is that you've actually got a plan in place where you see, here's my income from Social Security, here's my income from a pension, and then what other income do I have? All of my income sources are put together, and then this is my base layer. This is my baseline of income. And do I have a gap or do I have a shortfall? And then how am I going to cover that shortfall? The amount of money you're going to need to cover that shortfall, we'll talk about this in another video, but the amount of money you're going to need from your portfolio, that will likely tell you, like, are you funded for retirement? Maybe you are a little bit underfunded, or maybe you're funded okay, but you're going to have some constraints. Those are some key areas to be thinking about as you move into retirement. So you know how to organize life and you know how to make sure your paychecks are going to be steady and predictable. A few other takeaways that are especially important if you're looking to do some type of systematic withdrawal. Your cash war chest. In many systematic withdrawal strategies, it's not uncommon to set some money aside for those inevitable market declines. Meaning when the market goes down, we stop pulling from our portfolio and we start using money from this, cash or this low risk war chest that kind of helps bridge us through the difficult years. Well, that money right there has a purpose. It also is not just in case of emergency slush fund or a piggy bank to go raid, because the worst thing that could happen is you pull money out of those accounts thinking you're going to replenish it. Then you have a market downturn and you've got no war chest to shift over and use for spending. You have to actually continue to liquidate portfolio assets that are falling. The last two components, always stress test your plan. This is a good habit to get into each and every year, is stress test your plan. How do we look against inflation? How do we look against rising taxes? How do we look if our healthcare costs go up at a higher rate than traditional inflation over time? What does it look like if our Medicare premiums go up? What does it look like if we have a really severe market downturn? Can we withstand and adjust through all of these different what if scenarios? This is where a financial advisor can be invaluable when putting a plan together, because we have the tools and the software capabilities and the expertise, hopefully, to be able to help you navigate this and bring those numbers to life so that you can get peace of mind when putting your plan together. The last thing is understand this. Life is going to happen. You're not going to be able to predict every crisis. If you were, you would be the best money manager on earth. And even the best money managers on earth are completely transparent and tell you they have no chance of predicting each and every crisis. But what I would say is that each and every one of us has the ability to put a plan in place and to be disciplined. And one of the ways that you can protect yourself and your lifestyle in retirement is having a retirement income plan in place. And also think about these spending shocks and these what if scenarios along the way. Don't just rely on your portfolio. There's a term that I've used for years and years. It's called the Frankenstein portfolio, where the portfolio is designed to just do everything. That is not exactly what we want. We want a plan in place to make sure that we've thought through multiple scenarios and how have we allocated capital? Do we have an income plan? Do we have a growth bucket? Do we have some money for emergencies? Hey, do we have money that's set aside just for us to have fun and travel and do things that we think we'd love to do before we slow down? All of this stuff can be put together in a comprehensive retirement strategy. So, hey, if you think this makes sense and you think it's a good idea to make sure you don't fall into a liquidity trap or subscribe to this liquidity myth in retirement, give us a like on this video. And if you love retirement education content, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you next time.